They said an Omega had no place beside a king. They whispered she was a mistake, a weakness, a stain on ancient bloodlines. But on the night the Northern clan's greatest warrior lay dying in frozen darkness, it wasn't his armies that saved him. It was her. One pale hand, one quiet choice, one woman the world had taught to stay invisible, stepping into firelight to rewrite destiny itself. This is the story of how a ruler learned that true strength isn't born from dominance, but from the courage to trust the one everyone else has already discarded. Stay until the end to see how their bond shattered an empire's oldest lies. Drop a like if you believe love can overthrow kingdoms, and comment your city so we know you're watching. The forest didn't care about titles. It didn't bow to alpha kings or tremble before bloodlines stretching back 1,000 years. The ancient pines simply stood, silent witnesses draped in snow, as Kyle Draven collapsed against frozen bark and felt his life draining into the white earth beneath him. Blood. Too much blood. His left side was a constellation of agony, 3 broken ribs, a gash that ran from collarbone to hip, and something deeper, something vital, torn by the final enemy soldier's desperate blade. Victory, they would call it back at the fortress. The northern clans had crushed the southern coalition after 18 months of brutal warfare. The enemy king was dead. The treaties would be signed. But victory felt remarkably like dying. Kale's vision swam. He'd sent his personal guard ahead with the wounded, insisting he could make the 3-mile trek back to camp alone. Pride. Stupid, bone-deep alpha pride that wouldn't let anyone see their king carried on a stretcher like some fragile thing. Now that pride was going to kill him, and there would be no witnesses, no final words, no legacy except a frozen corpse discovered by spring thaw. His hands shook as he gathered fallen branches. Fire. He needed fire, or the cold would finish what the blade had started. Each movement sent lightning through his ribs, but he forced himself to work, scraping together kindling with fingers that barely responded to his commands. The spark kit was in his belt pouch. He'd carried it since he was 12, when his father, the previous Alpha King, had abandoned him in these same woods for a week to teach him self-reliance. A true alpha, his father had growled, needs nothing but his will to survive. His will felt remarkably insufficient at the moment. Strike. The flint sparked, but the kindling didn't catch. Strike again. His vision blurred. The forest tilted sideways. Strike, strike, strike. Finally, a whisper of smoke. A tiny orange glow. Kale bent close, cupping his hands around it, breathing life into the flame even as his own life dimmed. The fire grew, hesitant at first, then stronger. Heat kissed his frozen face. He slumped against the tree trunk, pressing his coat against the worst of the bleeding. Around him the forest stretched endlessly dark. No stars tonight, the clouds hung low and heavy with the promise of more snow. Perfect conditions for a king to die unmourned and alone. How had it come to this? 18 years he'd ruled the northern clans. 18 years of decisions that sacrificed personal desire for political necessity. He'd married for alliance, a cold arrangement that produced no heirs and ended when his wife died of fever 3 winters past. He'd sent young soldiers to their deaths to protect old borders. He'd sat in judgment over criminals and traitors, pronouncing sentences that haunted his sleep. And for what? To bleed out alone in frozen darkness while his council plotted which ambitious alpha would claim the throne next? The fire crackled. Kale's eyes drifted closed. He didn't hear the footsteps at first. They were too soft, too careful. The tread of someone who'd learned to move through the world without drawing attention. It was only when a quiet voice spoke that his eyes snapped open. Hand instinctively reaching for a sword, he no longer had the strength to lift. "Please." The voice was female, barely above a whisper. "I saw your fire. I'm not a threat. I'm just so cold." Kale blinked, trying to focus. The figure at the edge of his firelight was small, wrapped in a threadbare cloak that had seen better years. He couldn't make out her face in the shadows, but he could see her trembling, could smell the particular scent that marked her nature. Omega. His alpha instincts stirred despite his injuries, not with dominance or desire, but with something more primal. Protection. Every alpha was hardwired to respond to an omega's distress, though in practice, most ignored it unless the omega in question had value. Status. Connections. This one clearly had none of those things. "The fire's here," he heard himself say, his voice rough with pain and blood loss. "Take what warmth you need." She moved into the light like a ghost, and Cale got his first real look at her. Young, maybe 25, perhaps younger, pale skin that spoke of too many missed meals and not enough sunlight, dark hair falling loose from a braid tangled with ice and pine needles. But it was her eyes that caught him, gray as winter storm clouds and holding something he hadn't expected. Clarity. Most Omegas he'd encountered moved through the world with downcast gazes, trained from birth to be invisible, decorative, obedient. This one looked at him directly, taking in his injuries with an assessment that was almost clinical. "You're dying," she said simply. "Astute observation." Cale managed a bitter smile. "But at least I'll die warm." She crouched beside him, close enough that he could see the delicate bones of her face, the dirt smudged across her cheek. "May I?" She gestured to his makeshift bandage, his coat pressed against his side. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse. To maintain the alpha dignity that said weakness was shameful, help was unnecessary, vulnerability was death. But those instincts had gotten him here, bleeding out in the snow, so perhaps it was time to ignore them. "Why?" he asked instead. She met his eyes. "Because I've seen enough death. I'd prefer not to watch another person fade if I can help it." There was a story in those words, a weight that spoke of losses endured, of helplessness that had carved scars into her soul. Cale recognized it because he carried similar weight, though his losses had been draped in ceremony and called necessary sacrifice. He nodded, just once. She moved with surprising efficiency, peeling back his blood-soaked coat to reveal the wound beneath. Her sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know about how bad it looked. "This needs stitching," she said, "and cleaning, or infection will kill you even if the bleeding doesn't." "I'm fresh out of medical supplies." The world was starting to blur again at the edges. "Just keep the fire going. When they find me in a few days, I'd prefer not to be frozen solid." "They?" She was already moving, pulling something from inside her cloak. A small leather pouch, worn smooth with age. "Who's coming to find you?" "Eventually, someone." Cale watched through dimming vision as she pulled out a needle and what looked like thread. "I'm supposed to be somewhat important." She threaded the needle with steady hands, hands that had clearly done this before. Important people usually have guards, attendants. "Why are you alone?" "Stupidity," he admitted. "Pride. The usual alpha failings." Something flickered in her eyes, understanding perhaps or recognition. She tore a strip from the hem of her own dress, already threadbare and insufficient for the winter cold. "This is going to hurt." "Everything already hurts." She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with snow, then with something from her pouch that burned like liquid fire. Cale gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out, even as pain seared through him. She worked with a gentleness he hadn't expected, not the rough efficiency of a battlefield medic, but the careful touch of someone who understood suffering intimately. The needle pierced his flesh. He felt each stitch, a sharp counterpoint to the deeper agony of his injuries. But her hands stayed steady, her focus absolute. "Where did you learn this?" The question came out rougher than intended, shaped by pain. "Necessity." She didn't look up from her work. When you're Omega with no family, no pack, you learn to take care of yourself, or you don't survive. The casual way she said it, as if being alone and vulnerable in a world designed for pack hierarchies was simply an unremarkable fact, struck him harder than it should have. "No pack at all?" "Not for 6 years." Another stitch. "My birth pack expelled me when I was 19. Weak bloodline, they said. No alpha would want me, so why waste resources?" Cale's jaw tightened. Pack law technically forbade abandoning Omegas, but enforcement was lax in remote regions, and councils often looked the other way when it came to Omegas deemed undesirable. He'd signed dozens of reports acknowledging such cases, always with the same hollow justification: tradition, pack autonomy, non-interference in internal affairs. "How have you survived 6 years alone?" The question came out softer than he intended, her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Cleverness, caution, and staying far away from people who think hierarchy gives them the right to take whatever they want. She finished the last stitch and sat back, examining her work. It wasn't pretty, rough field medicine, but it would hold. She tore another strip from her dress and bound the wound, then moved to check his other injuries with the same careful efficiency. Kael watched her work and felt something shift in his chest. Not attraction, though she was lovely in a fragile, haunted way. Something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. This Omega, discarded and dismissed, had more practical skill and quiet courage than half his royal council. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated as if the question might be a trap. "Elara. Elara Voss? I'm Kael." "Just Kael?" A hint of humor touched her voice. "No family name for this somewhat important person?" He should tell her. Should reveal his identity and watch her face shift from cautious companionship to the careful deference everyone showed the Alpha King. But for the first time in years, maybe in his entire life, someone was treating him like a person instead of a title, and the relief of that was almost as potent as the pain medicine she'd used. "For now," he said quietly, "just Kael is enough." She accepted this with a small nod and continued working, checking his ribs with gentle pressure that still made him wince. 3 broken, I think. Maybe 4. You need a proper healer. I'll manage. You'll die of infection or internal bleeding within 3 days. She said it matter-of-factly, without drama. But if that's your choice, I won't argue. And what's your alternative? Let me stay. Keep the fire going. Make sure you don't die of shock or hypothermia tonight. She met his eyes again. "In the morning, if you're still alive, we figure out how to get you somewhere with actual medical care." "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" The question seemed to surprise her. She looked down at her hands, stained with his blood, rough from years of hard survival. "Warmth, safety for one night, the satisfaction of knowing I didn't let someone die when I could have helped. That's all. That's more than I usually get." There was no self-pity in her voice, just truth. Kael felt something crack in his chest, some old armor he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it was there. This Omega, who had every reason to be bitter, cynical, hardened by a world that had used her cruelly, still chose compassion. Still chose to help a stranger who might be dangerous, who offered her nothing in return, who couldn't even promise to survive the night. "Stay," he heard himself say. "Please." The please seemed to startle her more than anything else. Alphas didn't say please to Omegas, especially not in his world of rigid hierarchies and unquestionable commands. She settled beside the fire, adding another branch to keep it burning bright. "Try to rest. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. I'm used to going without." She pulled her thin cloak tighter. "Besides, someone has to make sure you don't stop breathing." Kael wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at him with irresistible force. The pain had dulled to a manageable throb. Whatever she'd used from that pouch had actual medicinal properties, and the warmth of the fire was a mercy he hadn't expected to feel again. His eyes drifted closed, then snapped open. "Elara." "Yes?" "Your cloak. It's not enough for this cold." "I'll manage." She echoed his earlier words with a slight smile. "You tore up your dress to bandage me. You'll freeze." "Probably not." But her shivering gave lie to the words. Kael reached for the heavy wolf pelt that had fallen from his shoulders during his collapse. It was matted with blood on one side, but the other half was clean and impossibly warm. "Take it." "I can't." "You just saved my life. Take the damn pelt." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly reached out and pulled the fur around her shoulders. The relief on her face was immediate and unconscious, a vulnerability she probably didn't mean to show. "Thank you," she whispered. Kael closed his eyes again, and this time let sleep take him. His last conscious thought was that if he died tonight, at least he wouldn't die alone. At least he'd die having done one genuinely kind thing, free of politics or calculation. At least someone would remember him as just Kael. He woke to gray dawn light and the smell of something cooking. Pain announced itself immediately, a full-body orchestra of agony that made him groan before he could stop himself. But he was alive. Impossibly, ridiculously alive. Alara sat beside the fire, now built up to a proper campfire, turning something on a makeshift spit. A rabbit, freshly killed and already skinned. She looked up as he stirred. "You're awake. Good. I was starting to worry." Kale tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His ribs screamed protest. "How long?" "You've been out for about 7 hours. It's just past dawn." She used a stick to push the rabbit closer to the flames. "I checked your stitches twice, no fresh bleeding. That's encouraging." "You caught a rabbit." It was a stupid thing to say, but his brain was still fuzzy with pain and exhaustion. "I set snares before I found your fire last night. Checked them at first light." She said it casually, as if Omega women alone in the wilderness routinely trapped game for survival, which he supposed she did. The smell of cooking meat made his stomach clench with hunger. He couldn't remember his last meal, sometime before the final battle, maybe 2 days ago. Alara noticed his expression. "It's almost ready. You need food. Your body's trying to heal from massive trauma. That requires fuel." She spoke with the authority of hard-won experience, and Kael found himself obeying without question when she handed him a portion of the cooked rabbit. It was simple, unseasoned, but it tasted like the finest feast he'd ever eaten. They ate in silence as the forest woke around them. Birds called tentatively from the pines. Somewhere distant, an elk bugled. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white that made the bloodstains near their fire look particularly stark. "I need to tell you something," Kael said finally. Alara looked at him, waiting. "My full name is Kael Draven. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Clans." He watched her face carefully, waiting for the shift, the fear, the calculation, the sudden servility that always came when people learned his identity. Instead, she just tilted her head slightly. "I know." "You know?" "I figured it out around the 3rd stitch." She gestured to the wolf pelt she still wore. "This is royal fur. The pattern's distinctive, and your scent, once I was close enough to really notice it, pure alpha, incredibly strong. Only the king carries that signature." "And you still stayed." It wasn't a question. "You were dying. Your title doesn't change that." She met his eyes steadily. "Though I assume you're about to tell me I should have realized the honor of your presence and acted appropriately grateful." There was a challenge in her voice, quiet but unmistakable. Kale found himself laughing, which hurt his ribs but felt worth it. "No, I was actually going to thank you for not treating me like a title last night. It's been a long time since anyone did that." Something in her expression softened. "Must be lonely, being that important." "Lonely doesn't cover it." The honesty surprised him. "It's like being surrounded by people every moment of every day, but none of them see you. They see the crown, the power, the decisions they need you to make. But you, the person underneath, that gets buried so deep you start to forget he exists." Alara was quiet for a moment, then, "I understand that. Not the king part, obviously, but the invisibility. The being surrounded by people who look through you instead of at you." She poked at the fire with a stick. "Sometimes I think being Omega is like being a ghost. Present, but not real. Visible, but not seen. You're the most real person I've encountered in years." The words came out with more intensity than he'd intended. She looked at him, something complex moving behind those storm-gray eyes. "You're in pain, and you nearly died. Don't confuse gratitude with reality. I'm many things, Alara, but confused isn't one of them." He shifted carefully, trying to find a position that didn't make his ribs feel like they were trying to pierce his lungs. "I have a proposition for you." Wariness crossed her face immediately. "Your Majesty." "Kael, just Kael, please, at least for this conversation." "Kael, then." She pulled the wolf pelt tighter, unconsciously defensive. "What kind of proposition?" "Come back with me, to the fortress." Silence. A bird called. The fire crackled. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because you saved my life. Because you have skills my kingdom needs. Because you deserve better than surviving alone in the wilderness, setting snares and hiding from packs that should be protecting you." He paused. Because I think you could help me be a better king. That's ridiculous. But her voice shook slightly. I'm nobody. Less than nobody. A cast-off Omega with no family, no education, no value to anyone. You kept me alive through a night that should have killed me. You showed more practical skill, more courage, more fundamental decency than half my trained advisors. That's not nothing. That's everything. Your council will never accept it. A stray Omega suddenly elevated? They'll call me ambitious, a schemer, someone trying to seduce the king for power. Let them call me whatever they want. I'm offering you a choice, Elara. Not an order, not a demand, a choice. He held her gaze. Come back with me. Let me give you safety, resources, a chance to decide your own future instead of just surviving day to day. Or don't. Walk away right now and I'll make sure you have supplies, money, enough to start fresh somewhere else. Either way, your choice. She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Kings don't offer Omegas choices. This one does. The silence stretched out, filled with possibility and danger in equal measure. Kael could see her thinking, weighing, calculating odds shaped by years of betrayal and disappointment. If I say yes, she said slowly, I'm not going to be some decorative thing you parade around. I'm not going to simper and bow and pretend to be something I'm not. Good. I have enough people doing that already. And when your council objects, because they will, I need your word that you won't throw me out to appease them. You have it. Why? The question burst out of her. Why does it matter? I'm just one Omega. You could find 100 others with better bloodlines, better training, better everything. Kyle met her eyes and told her the absolute truth. Because last night, when I was dying, you didn't see an Alpha King who could elevate you. You saw a person in pain. You helped because it was right, not because it was advantageous. In my world, Elara, that kind of genuine decency is rarer than gold, rarer than power. And I'm tired, so damn tired of being surrounded by people who only see what I can give them. Tears gathered in her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. You don't know me. Not really. Then let me learn. He extended his hand, palm up, an offer, not a command. Come back with me. See if we can build something better than what came before. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Kael could practically see the war raging inside her, hope battling against learned caution, possibility fighting with self-preservation. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. Her hand was small in his, rough with calluses, marked by scars from 6 years of wilderness survival. But her grip was steady, strong. Kael smiled, a real smile, perhaps the first genuine one in months. Then let's figure out how to get me back to the fortress without me bleeding to death along the way. That would be preferable. A hint of humor touched her voice. I didn't spend all that thread stitching you back together just to have you die on the journey home. They spent the next hour making preparations. Elara revealed a small cave about a quarter-mile away where she'd been sheltering, little more than a crack in the rocks. But it had kept her alive through the winter. She retrieved her few possessions, the leather pouch with her medicinal supplies, a worn blanket, a knife that had seen better days, and a small bag of dried herbs and roots. Everything she owned in the world fit in one small pack. The reality of that struck Kael harder than it should have. He ruled an entire kingdom, commanded armies, controlled resources that could feed thousands. And this woman had survived years with less than his servants carried on a routine journey. We need to move slow, Elara said, helping him to his feet with surprising strength for her small frame. Your ribs can't take jarring movement, and if you tear those stitches, we're back where we started. The 3-mile trek back to the fortress took most of the day. Kael leaned heavily on Elara's shoulder, each step a small exercise in agony management. She matched his pace without complaint, occasionally stopping to let him rest, once checking his wound to make sure nothing had reopened. They talked as they walked, small things at first. She told him about the herbs in her pouch. Golden seal for infection, willow bark for pain, yarrow to stop bleeding. He told her about the fortress, trying to prepare her for the overwhelming reality of suddenly being dropped into the center of northern clan politics. How many people live there, she asked. In the fortress itself? About 3,000. In the surrounding city, another 50,000. She stumbled slightly. He felt her shoulder tense beneath his arm. That's a lot of people. It can be overwhelming, especially if you're not used to crowds. I'm not used to more than one person at a time. She laughed, but there was real anxiety in it. The last 6 years, I've maybe spoken to 20 people total, usually just long enough to trade for supplies in remote villages. You can have your own space. Rooms in the royal wing, private, quiet. No one enters without your permission. Royal wing. She shook her head. This is insane. Yesterday I was setting rabbit snares. Today I'm walking toward a palace. Fortress. We're not fancy enough for palace. That distinction will surely comfort me when your nobles are sneering. Kyle squeezed her shoulder gently. Anyone who sneers at you answers to me. Remember that. They crested a hill just as the sun began its descent, and there it was, the northern fortress. Built of dark stone that seemed to grow from the mountain itself, towers rising like fingers against the sky, walls that had stood for 1,000 years. Banners flew from the battlements, the silver wolf of the northern clans against a field of deep blue. Ilara stopped moving, stopped breathing. That's home, Kale finished, for better or worse. She looked at him, genuinely terrified for the first time since he'd met her. I can't do this. Yes, you can. Kyle, I don't know anything about court politics, noble etiquette, how to talk to important people. Then you'll learn. Same way you learned to survive alone, same way you learned field medicine. You adapt, you endure, you become stronger than anyone expected. He turned to face her fully, ignoring the screaming protest from his ribs. Ilara, if you can keep me alive through a frozen night with nothing but needle and thread, you can handle a room full of overdressed nobles. A shaky laugh escaped her. You have a lot more faith in me than I do. Then borrow mine until yours grows back. He offered his hand again. One step at a time. That's all we need to do. She took his hand, took a breath, nodded. Together they began the final descent toward the fortress, toward a future neither of them could predict, toward a choice that would reshape everything. Behind them, the forest stood silent and watching. Ahead, the fortress gates began to open, and in the space between, in the snow-covered distance between wilderness and civilization, between who they'd been and who they might become, Ilara and Kyle walked forward into the unknown, bound together by a simple truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust that something better is possible. Sometimes the greatest courage is saying yes when every part of you screams to run. Sometimes survival means choosing to live instead of just refusing to die. The gates opened wider. They stepped through together, and everything changed. The massive oak doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder, and Ilara felt the weight of 1,000 eyes settle on her shoulders. The great hall of the northern fortress was everything she'd feared and nothing she could have imagined. Vaulted ceilings stretched up into shadows, held aloft by pillars carved with wolves and ancient runes. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting dancing light across walls hung with battle standards and ancestral weapons. And everywhere were people. Soldiers in polished armor, nobles in rich furs and silk, servants moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency, all of them stopping mid-motion to stare at their king, bloodied and barely standing, supported by a small Omega woman none of them recognized. The silence was deafening. Your Majesty. A tall man with silver threading through his dark hair pushed through the crowd. Everything about him screamed authority, from his perfectly tailored uniform to the thick gold chain of office across his chest. We thought you lost. The scouts reported. His words died as his eyes landed on Ilara. His expression shifted from relief to confusion to something harder, colder. Who is this? Kyle straightened despite the obvious pain it cost him. This is Ilara Voss. She saved my life. Get the royal physician immediately, Marcus, and prepare rooms in the East Wing. Marcus, clearly some kind of high-ranking official, didn't move. His gaze swept over Ilara with the kind of assessment that made her feel like a piece of livestock being evaluated for purchase. Your Majesty, with respect, you need medical attention urgently. Once you're stable, we can discuss this situation. I'm discussing it now. Kale's voice took on an edge Ilara hadn't heard before. Not the gentle tone he'd used with her in the forest, but something with teeth. Command. Alara will be given quarters, protection, and whatever resources she requires. Is that clear? Of course, Your Majesty, but perhaps we should... Now, Marcus. The older man's jaw tightened, but he bowed stiffly. As you command. He snapped his fingers at a nervous-looking servant. Fetch Dr. Renfield, and someone prepare the blue suite. Not the blue suite, Kael cut in. The rooms adjacent to mine. Audible gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Alara felt her face burn. She didn't understand all the intricacies of court hierarchy, but even she knew that rooms next to the king meant something significant, something scandalous. Marcus looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Your Majesty, those rooms have been closed since the Queen died. To give them to an unknown Omega will raise questions. Then let them ask questions. Kael swayed slightly, and Alara immediately braced him, ignoring the whispers that erupted around them. I'm done explaining myself to people who should trust my judgment. Get it done. A woman in healer's robes appeared through the crowd, her face creased with professional concern. Your Majesty, you should be in bed immediately. These wounds were stitched by Alara, Kael interrupted. Check her work if you like, Dr. Renfield, but do it quickly. I'm tired of standing. The physician's sharp eyes fixed on Alara with surprise. You did field medicine on trauma this extensive? Alara's voice came out smaller than she wanted. I did what I could. It's not perfect. It's remarkable. Dr. Renfield had moved closer, examining the visible bandaging with what looked like genuine respect. Clean stitches, proper spacing, and you managed to stop the bleeding long enough to get him here alive. Where did you train? I didn't. I just learned. Well, you learned well. The doctor turned back to Kael. But you still need proper care. Come, both of you. They were ushered through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past tapestries worth more than Alara had seen in her entire life, through rooms filled with treasures she couldn't name. The fortress was a maze of stone and status, and she felt herself shrinking with each step. This was a mistake. A terrible, inevitable mistake. The physician's quarters were warm and clean, smelling of herbs and alcohol. Dr. Renfield worked with efficient hands, cutting away Alara's makeshift bandages and examining the wound beneath. Whoever taught you did an excellent job, she murmured, cleaning around the stitches. These will hold. You may have saved more than his life. You saved his future mobility. A wound this deep, improperly treated, would have crippled him. Alara stood awkwardly in the corner, unsure what to do with her hands. She was acutely aware of how she must look. Dirty clothes, tangled hair, skin pale from malnutrition. A wild thing dragged in from the forest. Kael's eyes found hers across the room. You can sit down. You're not a servant. I don't know what I am, she admitted quietly. You're someone who deserves rest. He winced as the doctor probed his ribs. And probably a meal. When's the last time you ate properly? She couldn't remember. Weeks, maybe? The rabbit that morning had been the most substantial food she'd had in months. Dr. Renfield caught the exchange and frowned. Girl, when did you last have a full meal? Alara shifted uncomfortably. I manage. That's not an answer. The physician turned to a young assistant hovering nearby. Bring soup, bread, and whatever fruit the kitchen has. Now. She looked back at Alara with something that might have been kindness. Sit. You look ready to collapse. The food arrived faster than seemed possible. Thick vegetable soup, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, apples and pears arranged on a silver plate. Alara stared at it like it might disappear. Eat, Kael said gently. She did, trying to pace herself, trying not to look desperate. But the soup was rich and perfect, the bread soft, and her body screamed for more after years of deprivation. She forced herself to eat slowly, aware of the physician's concerned glances. Dr. Renfield finished her examination and straightened. You need bed rest, Your Majesty, at least a week, possibly 2. Those ribs need time to knit, and you've lost significant blood. I'll prepare a tonic for the pain and something to prevent infection. Fine. But Alara stays with me. The physician's eyebrows rose. Your Majesty. Not like that. Kael's voice was patient but firm. She's alone in an unfamiliar place surrounded by strangers who are already looking at her like she's a threat. I won't have her isolated and vulnerable. The propriety can be damned. He met the doctor's eyes. She saved my life, Renfield. The least I can do is make sure she feels safe. Something passed between them, some understanding that Alara couldn't quite read. Finally, the physician nodded. As you wish, but separate rooms at minimum. I'll have no one accusing this girl of impropriety. Agreed. They were led to the royal wing an hour later, once Kael had been properly bandaged and dosed with enough pain medicine to make walking bearable. The corridors here were quieter, guarded by soldiers who straightened as their king passed. The rooms they'd prepared for Alara were impossible. A bedroom larger than any space she'd ever lived in, with a bed that could fit 4 people comfortably. Heavy curtains in deep blue velvet. A sitting area with cushioned chairs arranged before a fireplace already crackling with warmth. A bathing room with an actual copper tub and more towels than she could count. She stood in the doorway, unable to move. Is it acceptable? Kael asked from behind her. Acceptable? Her voice cracked. I can't. This is too much. It's what you deserve. I don't deserve this. I set rabbit snares. I stitch wounds. I'm nobody. Stop. Kael moved to stand beside her, his presence solid despite his injuries. You keep saying that, nobody, as if your value is determined by what other people decided you were worth. But Alara, you're here because you chose compassion over safety. You're here because you have skills that saved a king's life. You're here because I asked you to be. That makes you somebody. Tears burned in her eyes. Your people don't see it that way. Then they'll learn. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, his expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, the Council has requested an emergency meeting. Tell them I'm recovering. They're insistent, given the circumstances of your return. Marcus's eyes flicked to Alara. They have concerns. I'm sure they do, Kael sighed. When? Within the hour, in the council chamber. Fine, I'll be there. Marcus hesitated. Should I arrange for the girl to be situated elsewhere during the meeting? Her name is Alara, and no, she stays in these rooms as planned. Kael's tone left no room for argument. After Marcus left, Kael turned back to Alara. I need to face the council. They're going to push back hard about you being here, but I want you to know something. He waited until she met his eyes. Whatever they say, whatever arguments they make, you're staying. You're safe here. That's not negotiable. What if they're right? The words burst out before she could stop them. What if I am a mistake? A liability? What if bringing me here puts you in danger politically? Then it's a danger I choose to accept. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. Trust me, Alara. Can you do that? She wanted to. Against all logic and self-preservation, she wanted to believe that this broken, bleeding king genuinely cared about the fate of one discarded Omega. I'll try, she whispered. That's all I ask. He headed toward the door, moving carefully. Rest. Eat. The servants will bring you anything you need. I'll be back after the council meeting. The door closed behind him, and Alara was alone in a room worth more than her entire life. She stood there for a long moment, then slowly walked to the window. Outside, the fortress sprawled beneath her, a city of stone and power, of hierarchies she didn't understand, and dangers she couldn't name. What had she done? The council chamber was exactly as unwelcoming as Kael expected. 12 of his most senior advisors sat around the ancient oak table, their faces ranging from concerned to hostile. Marcus had clearly briefed them already. Their expressions said they'd formed their opinions before Kael even entered the room. Your Majesty. Lord Garrett, the Minister of Defense, spoke first. His voice was measured, but steel underneath. We're relieved beyond words to see you alive. When the scouts reported you missing, I'm aware of what they reported. Kael lowered himself into his chair with barely concealed pain. And I'm aware this meeting isn't about my health. So let's skip the pleasantries and discuss what you really want to talk about. A moment of uncomfortable silence. Then Lady Thorne, the trade minister, leaned forward. Who is she? I've told you. Her name is Alara Voss. She's an Omega who saved my life when I was dying in the forest. An Omega with no family, no pack, no background we can verify. Marcus pulled out a sheet of paper. I've already sent runners to check her story. No record of a Voss family in any northern registry. No Omega matching her description in any pack census. Because she was expelled from her birth pack 6 years ago, Kyle said flatly. Cast out for having a bloodline they deemed unworthy. She's survived alone ever since. Convenient, Lord Garrett muttered. An Omega appears out of nowhere, saves the king at his most vulnerable moment, and is immediately elevated to rooms in the royal wing. Forgive our skepticism, Your Majesty. Kael felt anger stirring beneath his exhaustion. You think this was planned? That she somehow orchestrated me getting wounded in battle, stumbling alone through the forest, and nearly dying so she could swoop in and manipulate me? Stranger things have happened, Lady Thorne said carefully. You're unmarried, Your Majesty. Vulnerable to certain influences. An Omega, particularly one trained in manipulation, could easily... Trained in manipulation? Kael's laugh was bitter. Have you seen her? She's terrified, malnourished. Her hands are scarred from years of surviving alone. She owns nothing but a knife and some medicinal herbs. What exactly about that screams master manipulator? Appearance can be deceiving. This from Lord Chen, the oldest council member. His voice was gentler than the others, but no less firm. Your Majesty, we understand you feel gratitude. That's natural and commendable, but gratitude doesn't require bringing her into the royal wing, give her gold, a house in the city, protection if you wish. But this looks like something else. It looks like I'm treating her with basic human decency. It looks like you're elevating a nobody to a position of influence, Marcus corrected. And that raises questions about her motives, about your judgment, about what she might be after. Kyle slammed his hand on the table, then regretted it as pain shot through his ribs. She's after nothing. She asked for warmth by a fire. That's all. I'm the one who offered more. Why? The question came from Lady Thorne. Why does this particular Omega matter so much to you? Because she showed me more genuine kindness in one night than most of you have shown in years. The words came out harder than intended, but Kael didn't take them back. She had nothing to gain. I could have died anyway. She risked her limited resources, her safety, her warmth to help a stranger. When's the last time anyone in this room did something purely because it was right, with no thought of political advantage? Silence. Uncomfortable, telling silence. Lord Garrett cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we're not questioning the purity of her initial actions. We're questioning what happens now. You've given her access to the royal wing, proximity to you at your most vulnerable. If she whispers the wrong words in the wrong ears, passes information to enemies, she doesn't have enemies. She has nothing. Everyone has enemies, Your Majesty, especially those who suddenly gain the king's favor. Marcus leaned forward. There are ambitious nobles who've spent years cultivating connections, playing politics, hoping for a chance at royal attention. And now an unknown Omega appears and bypasses all of them. How do you think they'll react? I don't care how they react. You should, Lady Thorne's voice was sharp, because they'll target her, socially, politically, possibly physically. She's a threat to established order, and order doesn't tolerate threats quietly. Kael felt exhaustion pulling at him. The pain medicine was wearing off, and every word was a battle. So what would you have me do? Throw her out to appease people who think hierarchy matters more than humanity? We're suggesting caution, Lord Chen said carefully. Test her, watch her. Don't give her power until you're certain she can be trusted. I am certain. Based on one night, Marcus's control cracked slightly. Your Majesty, with all respect, you were dying, in pain, vulnerable. Your judgment was compromised. My judgment is fine. Then prove it. But Lady Thorne folded her hands. Give us time to investigate her properly. Check her background, her story, her connections. If she's truly what you say, a simple Omega with nothing to hide, then verification costs nothing. But if there's more to her, there isn't. Then what's the harm in checking? Kael stared at them, at their faces filled with political calculation and practiced concern. They weren't entirely wrong. Caution was wise, especially at his level of power. But there was something else underneath their arguments. Something that made his skin crawl. Fear. They were afraid of Alara because she represented chaos, because she didn't fit into their careful hierarchies and predictable patterns, because she'd bypassed all their rules and gotten close to the king through simple human decency. And if that could work, then what did it say about their own elaborate games? Fine, he said finally. Investigate her background. Send your runners, check your records, do whatever you need to satisfy your paranoia. But while you're doing that, she stays in those rooms. She stays under my protection, and anyone who treats her with anything less than respect answers to me personally. Is that understood? Reluctant nods around the table. Good. Now, unless there's actual kingdom business to discuss, I'm going to rest before I pass out. He stood, moving carefully, and headed for the door. Behind him, the council erupted into urgent whispers. Let them whisper. Let them investigate. They wouldn't find anything because there was nothing to find. Alara was exactly what she appeared to be, someone who'd survived impossible circumstances through strength and skill. But as Kael walked back toward the royal wing, Marcus's words echoed in his mind. Everyone has enemies, especially those who suddenly gain the king's favor. Alara had bathed, changed into a simple dress someone had left for her, and was sitting in the window seat when Kael returned. She looked small against the vast room, her wet hair falling loose around her shoulders. She turned as the door opened. How did it go? About as well as expected. He lowered himself into a chair with a wince. They're suspicious, concerned, convinced you're either a spy or a manipulator. Her face fell. Maybe I should leave. Absolutely not. Miss Kael, I'm causing problems for you. You're exposing problems that were already there, Sean. He rubbed his temples. My council has gotten too comfortable treating people like chess pieces. It's good for them to be reminded that not everyone operates on calculation and political advantage. But if they investigate me, they'll find exactly what you told me. An Omega expelled from her pack, surviving alone. There's nothing to hide, right? She hesitated just a fraction too long. Kael's attention sharpened. Alara? Is there something I should know? It's nothing, just... She pulled her knees up to her chest. My pack didn't just expel me for weak bloodlines. There was an incident. The pack alpha's son, he wanted me. As a mate. I refused. Ice settled in Kael's stomach. What did he do? Nothing I couldn't handle. But when I fought back, when I broke his nose and ran, they made up charges. Said I was unstable, dangerous. They expelled me to protect their son's reputation. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. If your investigators dig deep enough, they'll find those records. They'll see I was labeled as violent, unbalanced, for defending yourself. The records won't say that. They'll just say I attacked a pack alpha's son without provocation. Kael felt rage building, hot and familiar. How many times had he seen this? Powerful people rewriting reality to protect their interests, turning victims into villains. What pack? Does it matter? Yes. She sighed. The Eastern Ridge Pack. But Kael, they're not wrong that I can be difficult. I don't submit well. I question things. I push back when I think something's unjust. That's why no one wanted me. That's why I've been alone. That's why you're exactly what I need, Kael said firmly. Alara, I don't want someone who submits blindly. I want someone who'll tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Your council won't see it that way. My council doesn't get a vote in who I trust. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young servant girl entered, curtsying nervously. Dinner is served in the king's private dining room, Your Majesty. And, she glanced at Alara, there are some ladies waiting in the hall. They wish to welcome the king's guests properly. Kael frowned. What ladies? The girl looked terrified. Lady Helena Marsh and her companions, Your Majesty. They insisted it was a matter of courtesy. Tell them, it's fine. Alara stood, smoothing her dress. I can't hide forever. If they want to meet me, let them come. Alara, Helena Marsh is, I can handle myself. There was steel in her voice now, the same quiet strength that had kept her alive through 6 years alone. Kael wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. I'll stay. No, this is between women. They'll be more honest without you here. She turned to the servant. Show them in. 3 women entered, dressed in the kind of elaborate finery that screamed old money and older status. The leader, Helena Marsh, was perhaps 30, beautiful in a calculated way, with perfect posture and a smile that didn't reach her eyes.
"So," Helena said, looking Alara up and down like examining a curiosity, "you're the mysterious Omega who's captured our king's attention." "I didn't capture anything." Alara's voice was calm. "I treated his wounds, that's all." "How wonderfully humble." Helena circled her slowly. "Tell me, where did you learn such impressive medical skills? Surely not in whatever backwater pack spawned you." The other two women tittered. Alara didn't flinch. "I learned by doing."
When you're alone and injured, you either figure out healing or you die. How rustic. Helena's smile sharpened. And now you're here, in rooms that belonged to the late queen. One might wonder what you did to earn such generosity. I saved his life. So you say. Convenient that there were no witnesses. Convenient that he's alive to confirm it. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Helena's eyes narrowed. You should be careful, little Omega. This fortress has rules. Hierarchies. You may have charmed the king while he was weak and vulnerable, but that won't last. Eventually, he'll see you for what you are. And what am I? Nobody. Helena leaned close, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. A stray dog that wandered in from the cold. And once the king realizes his mistake, you'll be thrown out like the trash you are. Alara met her gaze steadily. If I'm nobody, why are you threatened by me? Helena's mask cracked. For just a moment, rage flashed across her perfect features. Then she recovered, stepping back with a brittle laugh. Threatened? By you? Darling, I'm the daughter of the Duke of Western Reach. My bloodline goes back 6 generations of pure alpha stock. I'm not threatened by a mongrel Omega with delusions of grandeur. Then why are you here? The question hung in the air like a blade. Helena's smile became razor sharp. To remind you of your place. To help you understand that charity has limits. The king may feel he owes you gratitude, but gratitude fades. And when it does, you'll have nowhere to go except back to whatever hole you crawled out of. She turned on her heel and swept toward the door, her companions following. At the threshold, she paused. Oh, and Alara? Do watch your back. The fortress can be dangerous for those who don't belong. The door closed behind them. Alara stood alone in the sudden silence, her heart pounding. She'd expected hostility, but the naked hatred in Helena's eyes had been something else, something personal. This was only the beginning. She could feel it. The storm gathering, the knives being sharpened in the dark. And for the first time since saying yes to Kael's offer, Alara wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to go back now. The fortress doors had closed behind her. And in this world of power and hierarchy, there was no room for the weak. So she would have to become strong. The thought crystallized in Alara's mind as she stood alone in the opulent room, her hands still trembling from Helena's threats. She'd survived 6 years in the wilderness by learning to read danger, to anticipate predators, to strike first when cornered. The fortress was just another kind of wilderness, stone instead of trees, silk gowns instead of fur, but the same brutal logic underneath. Survive or be destroyed. She moved to the writing desk and found paper, ink, a quill that felt foreign in her calloused hand. If they were going to investigate her, she'd give them the truth on her terms. She began writing, detailing everything, her birth pack's name, the Alpha's son who'd attacked her, the false charges, her 6 years alone. Every scar had a story. Every survival skill had been learned in blood and desperation. Let them read it. Let them judge. She was done hiding. A soft knock interrupted her. Not the sharp, demanding knock of nobility, but something gentler. Come in, she called. An older woman entered, carrying a tray of tea and small cakes. Her uniform marked her as senior household staff, but her eyes held warmth instead of judgment. Thought you might need something after that visit. Lady Helena has a reputation for leaving people shaken. I'm fine. You're clenching your jaw so hard I can hear your teeth grinding. The woman set down the tray with practiced efficiency. I'm Margaret, head of household staff. Been here 30 years, seen 3 kings and more court drama than any reasonable person should endure. She poured tea with steady hands. Drink. The bergamot helps with stress. Alara accepted the cup, surprised by the kindness. Why are you being nice to me? Because someone should be. Margaret settled into a chair uninvited. And because I saw what you did for His Majesty. Dr. Renfield showed me your stitch work. That wasn't luck or accident, that was skill earned through necessity. She met Alara's eyes. I recognize survival when I see it. Something in Alara's chest loosened slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm about to give you advice you won't want to hear. Margaret sipped her own tea. You can't win their game by their rules. Helena and her circle? They've spent years perfecting the art of social warfare. They'll smile while sliding knives between your ribs, and you'll never see it coming. So what do I do? Change the game entirely. Margaret leaned forward. Stop trying to fit into their world. Make them deal with yours. You survived 6 years alone. That's a strength they can't comprehend. You saved the king's life with nothing but needle and thread. That's power they don't possess. Stop apologizing for existing and start showing them what you're capable of. The king said something similar, because it's true. His Majesty sees clearly when it comes to people. Always has. He wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't believe you belonged. Margaret stood, smoothing her apron. But belief only takes you so far. Eventually you'll need to prove him right. After she left, Alara stared at her written confession. Margaret's words echoed in her mind, mixing with Kael's earlier conviction, forming something new, something dangerous. She'd spent 6 years making herself invisible. Maybe it was time to be seen. 3 days passed in uneasy tension. Kael remained confined to his quarters under Dr. Renfield's strict orders, his ribs healing slowly. Alara visited him daily, their conversations becoming easier, deeper. He told her about the weight of kingship, the loneliness of command. She told him about the forest, about learning to read weather in the wind, about the strange peace of complete solitude. Sometimes I miss it, she admitted during one visit, curled in the window seat while he rested. The quiet, the simplicity. No politics, no judgment, just survival. You can leave any time, Kael said quietly. I meant what I said. Your choice. I know. She traced patterns on the glass. But running away because it's hard would dishonor everything I survived to get here. I'm tired of just surviving, Kael. I want to actually live. His smile was soft, genuine. Then stay, learn, fight back when they push you. Helena's been spreading rumors. I heard the servants whispering. They're saying I'm a spy, a seductress, a clever manipulator who tricked you while you were vulnerable. Let them talk. It's not that simple. Words have power here. They're poisoning people against me before I've even had a chance. A commotion in the hallway cut her off. Raised voices, then a sharp knock. Marcus entered without waiting, his face grim. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Kael sat up carefully. What kind of situation? A delegation from the Eastern Ridge Pack has arrived. Unannounced, they're demanding an audience immediately. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Eastern Ridge, her old pack, the ones who'd expelled her, branded her violent, destroyed her reputation to protect their alpha's son. They'd found her. Kael's eyes snapped to her, reading her expression. What do they want? They claim it's about a fugitive Omega. Someone dangerous who needs to be returned to face justice. Marcus's gaze flicked to Alara with barely concealed suspicion. They have official charges, documentation. They say she attacked their alpha's heir without provocation and fled before trial. That's not true, Alara breathed. They have witnesses, signed testimonies, medical records of the heir's injuries. Marcus placed a folder on the table. It's very thorough. Kael's face hardened. And they just happened to track her here, now. They claim someone sent word that a matching Omega had been seen at the fortress. They're invoking the Interpact Justice Accords, legal right to extradite criminals across territorial boundaries. Alara stood on shaking legs. I'm not a criminal. He tried to force himself on me. I defended myself. Your word against documented evidence. Marcus's tone was professionally neutral, but his meaning was clear. The Accords are binding treaty law, Your Majesty. If their charges are legitimate, we're obligated to turn her over. Like hell we are. Your Majesty, breaking treaty over one Omega who saved my life. Kael's voice was ice and steel. Tell the delegation I'll meet with them tomorrow, and get me every detail of those charges. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with.
Marcus bowed stiffly and left. Silence filled the room like floodwater.
I should go, Alara said quietly. Leave before this becomes an international incident. I've survived alone before. No.
Kale swung his legs off the bed despite obvious pain. You're not running, not from lies and false charges. Kale, they have documentation, witnesses, medical proof. My word means nothing against. Your word means everything to me. He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders gently. Tell me the truth. All of it. What really happened? So she told him.
About the Alpha's son, Damon, who decided she would be his despite her refusal. About how he'd cornered her in the storage house, how his hands had torn at her clothes, how she'd fought back with everything she had, how her knee had connected with his face, breaking his nose, giving her seconds to run. I didn't go back for my things. Didn't say goodbye. Just ran. Her voice cracked. By the time I was far enough to feel safe, they'd already declared me expelled. Said I'd seduced Damon, then attacked him when he rejected me. Made me the villain in a story where I was the victim. And the witnesses? His friends. Other alphas who'd stood outside while She couldn't finish. Kael's jaw clenched so hard she heard tendons crack. They let it happen. They enabled it, laughed about it. One of them asked if he could have me next. Names? I need their names. Kael, what are you going to do? I'm going to prove they're lying. His eyes held cold fury. And then I'm going to make sure they regret ever touching you. The council meeting the next morning was a battlefield dressed in silk and ceremony. The Eastern Ridge delegation sat on one side of the long table. Alpha Marcus Voss. No relation to Alara, she'd explained. His son Damon sporting a nose that had healed slightly crooked, and 3 other witnesses. Opposite them, Kael's council, with Marcus acting as mediator. Alara sat beside Kael, her spine straight, despite terror singing through her veins. Let's be clear about why we're here, Alpha Voss began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. 6 years ago, this Omega, he gestured dismissively at Alara, attacked my son without provocation. Broke his nose, caused significant injury, then fled before justice could be served. We have medical documentation, witness testimony, and our own history of instability. Instability, Kael repeated flatly. She was always difficult. Questioned authority, refused proper Omega submission. We tried to help her, to correct these behaviors, but she was beyond redemption. Alpha Voss opened his folder. Her own birth parents recommended expulsion, said she was dangerous. Alara flinched. She hadn't known that detail. Her parents had actually recommended. May I see that documentation? Kael asked coolly. Papers were passed across the table. Kael read through them, his expression unreadable. Alara watched medical reports detailing Damon's broken nose, bruised ribs, facial lacerations. Witness statements all saying the same thing. Alara had lured Damon somewhere private, then attacked him viciously when he'd refused her advances. It was comprehensive, detailed, completely fabricated. These are very thorough, Kael said finally. Almost too thorough. Tell me, Alpha Voss, why wait 6 years to pursue these charges? We've been searching for her. She's clever at hiding. Yet someone conveniently informed you of her presence here. Who? Voss smiled thinly. We received an anonymous tip. Someone concerned about your Majesty's safety, given this Omega's violent history. Helena, Alara realized with sick certainty. Helena had somehow discovered her identity and contacted the Eastern Ridge Pack. I see. Kael leaned back carefully, favoring his ribs. And what exactly do you want? Return her to us. Let her face proper justice. After a fair trial, she'll receive appropriate punishment. What punishment? For attacking an Alpha heir? Likely permanent exile to the labor camps. Perhaps 20 years. 20 years of brutal servitude. Alara's hands clenched in her lap. That wasn't justice. It was a death sentence, dressed in legal language. Here's what I find interesting, Kael said conversationally. Your son's medical reports show a broken nose and bruising consistent with defensive wounds, but there's no mention of the kind of damage a premeditated attack would cause. No bite marks, no scratches beyond his face, no evidence of prolonged violence. She caught him by surprise, Sulk. An Omega catching a full-grown Alpha heir by surprise? Kael's eyebrow rose. Your son must be remarkably unobservant, or remarkably weak. Damon's face flushed red. She's lying about what happened. I rejected her advances and she went insane. Did you? Kael's gaze fixed on him like a predator sighting prey. Reject her? Or did you corner her in a storage house and attempt to force yourself on her while your friends stood guard outside? The room went utterly silent. Damon's face went from red to white. That's a lie. Is it? Kael pulled out his own papers. Because I have testimony from a servant who worked at Eastern Ridge 6 years ago. She's now employed in my kitchens, and when she heard about this case, she came forward with an interesting story. Ilara's heart hammered. What testimony? Kael continued. She testifies that on the day in question, she saw 4 young alphas dragging an Omega toward the storage house. The Omega was crying, struggling. She heard one of them say, "Hold her still." Another laughed and said something about taking turns. That's fabricated. Alpha Voss stood. You cannot trust the word of a servant over documented liars? Kael's voice cracked like a whip. I also have medical testimony from Dr. Renfield, who examined Ilara upon her arrival. She found scarring consistent with sexual assault, defensive wounds on Ilara's arms, evidence of trauma that matches her story perfectly. This is outrageous, Damon shouted. She's a nobody, an Omega whore who... The slap came so fast Ilara barely saw it. One moment Damon was shouting, the next Kael was standing, having moved with shocking speed despite his injuries, and Damon was stumbling back with a red mark blooming across his face. You will speak of her with respect, Kael said quietly, or you will leave this fortress in pieces. The threat hung in the air like drawn steel. Alpha Voss stepped between them. Your Majesty, you're allowing personal feelings to cloud judgment. The law says that false charges and manufactured evidence are criminal offenses. Kael returned to his seat, breathing hard. The law also says that alphas who commit assault face severe consequences. Should I pursue that line of investigation? Should I dig deeper into what really happened that day? Into what your son and his friends actually did? The delegation exchanged panicked glances. Because I promise you, Kael continued, voice dropping to something dangerous, if we open that door, I will not stop until I've uncovered every ugly truth, every assault your son committed, every witness you intimidated, every lie you told. And when I'm done, the Eastern Ridge Pack will be infamous for breeding rapists and calling it tradition. Alpha Voss's composure cracked. You would destroy our pack's reputation over one Omega? I would destroy your pack to protect the truth. Kael stood again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw these charges. You're going to issue a formal apology to Ilara for false accusations. And you're going to return to Eastern Ridge and never speak her name again. And if we refuse? Then I invoke my authority as Alpha King and order a full investigation into every Omega expulsion from your pack in the last decade. I guarantee we'll find a pattern of abuse, of alphas assaulting Omegas and then branding the victims as criminals when they fight back. Kael's smile was sharp as broken glass. How many other Ilaras are there, Alpha Voss? How many other women did you destroy to protect your son's reputation? The silence was damning. Finally, Alpha Voss spoke through gritted teeth. We withdraw the charges. And the apology? It took visible effort. We apologize for any misunderstanding regarding the Omega Ilara Voss. Not good enough. Kael's voice was implacable. Apologize for falsifying evidence, for threatening an innocent woman, for abusing your authority to cover up your son's crimes. The words came out strangled, forced, but they came. A full apology that left Damon trembling with rage and Alpha Voss looking like he'd aged 10 years. Now get out of my fortress, Kael said quietly. And if I ever hear of you harming another Omega, there won't be a corner of this world remote enough to hide from my justice. They left in humiliated silence. The moment the doors closed, Kael swayed. Ilara caught him before he fell, feeling wetness seeping through his shirt. You tore your stitches, she said, voice shaking with emotion she couldn't name. You idiot! You tore your stitches defending me. Worth it. His smile was pained but genuine. Besides, you know how to fix them. Dr. Renfield burst in moments later, taking in the scene with professional disapproval. I told you bed rest, Your Majesty. not courtroom theatrics. But her hands were gentle as she helped Alara guide him to a chair. The council members filed out quietly, their expressions ranging from shock to grudging respect. Only Marcus remained, his face carefully neutral. Your Majesty, that was bold. That was necessary. Kael grimaced as the doctor cut away his bloody shirt. Are we going to have a problem, Marcus? That depends. Are you planning to make a habit of threatening allied pacts over personal matters? If those allied pacts are covering up assault? Yes. Kael met his advisor's eyes. I'm tired of pretty lies, Marcus. Tired of political convenience being used to excuse cruelty. If that makes me a problematic king, so be it. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. The servant who testified doesn't exist. I made her up. Kael's smile was grim, but Voss didn't know that. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. Guilty men panic when confronted with evidence, even fabricated evidence. That was a massive risk. It worked. Marcus shook his head slowly. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. The old king would never have done something so reckless. He would have sacrificed the Omega to maintain political stability. I'm not my father. No, you're something potentially better, or potentially more dangerous. Marcus bowed slightly. I'll make sure the council understands that this matter is closed. After he left, Alara knelt beside Kael, while Dr. Renfield worked on his reopened wound. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. You risked everything for me. I risked nothing. He caught her hand. I defended the truth. There's no risk in that. You made powerful enemies. I already had powerful enemies. At least now I have a clear conscience. He squeezed her fingers gently. You're safe now, Alara, truly safe. No one can send you back. No one can touch you. Tears burned in her eyes. Why? Why do you care so much? Because 6 years ago you needed help and no one gave it. Because you've been punished for being a victim. Because every time I look at you, I see what my kingdom should be. Strong not through dominance, but through resilience. Powerful not through violence, but through refusing to break. He touched her cheek gently. Because you matter, Alara. And I'm done pretending otherwise. The words cracked something open in her chest. Some wall she'd built to survive. Some armor that suddenly felt unnecessary. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to let people care. How to trust that it won't be ripped away. Neither do I. His smile was crooked. We'll figure it out together. Dr. Renfield cleared her throat meaningfully. While this is very touching, I need to finish stitching before His Majesty bleeds out from romantic declarations. They laughed, and the tension broke. But as Alara sat back watching the doctor work, she felt the fortress around her differently. Not as a prison or a battlefield, but as something else. Something that might, impossibly, become home. The next week transformed the fortress. News of Kael's confrontation with the Eastern Ridge Pack spread like wildfire. The whispered rumors about Alara shifted. Not entirely, not completely, but enough. She was no longer just the suspicious Omega who'd appeared from nowhere. She was the woman the king had defended publicly, dramatically, at political cost. Some nobles still sneered, Helena's circle still whispered poison, but others began to reconsider. If the king believed in her enough to risk allied relationships, perhaps there was more to her than met the eye. Alara used the shift carefully. She began attending council meetings, sitting quietly in the corner, observing. At first, advisors objected, but Kael's flat stare silenced them. She learned names, relationships, the subtle power dynamics that govern decisions. She also began working with Dr. Renfield. You have genuine skill, the physician said one afternoon as they treated a soldier's infected wound. Raw, unrefined, but real. I could teach you properly. Make you an actual healer instead of just someone who knows field medicine. Why would you do that? Because good healers are rare. Because you saved the king when trained physicians weren't there. Because I'm old and need someone to pass my knowledge to. Renfield handed her a scalpel. And because I like you. You don't pretend to know things you don't. That's rarer than you'd think in this fortress. So Alara learned. Anatomy, diseases, surgical techniques, the properties of hundreds of herbs and compounds. She absorbed it all with desperate hunger, finally understanding why Kael had brought her here. She could become something, Not just survive, but build a real life. But peace never lasted long. It was Margaret who brought the warning, slipping into Alara's room late one evening with urgency written across her face. There's trouble brewing. Helena's been meeting with someone from outside the fortress. The servants who clean her rooms found letters, encoded but readable enough. They're planning something. What kind of something? I don't know. But it involves you. And it involves making the king look weak for defending you. Margaret gripped her hands. Be careful. Helena doesn't lose gracefully. Alara thanked her and locked the door after she left. She should tell Kael immediately, should warn him. But something held her back. If she ran to him with every threat, every whisper, she'd just confirm what his critics said, that she was weak, dependent, a burden he carried out of misplaced nobility. She needed to handle this herself. She spent the next 2 days gathering information quietly, listened to servant gossip, watched Helena's movements, pieced together fragments of overheard conversation. The picture that emerged was terrifying. Helena had contacted someone in the Southern Coalition, the enemy Kael had just defeated in war. She was offering information about the fortress's defenses, about Kael's injuries, about weaknesses in the Northern Clan's military structure. In exchange, she wanted their support in discrediting Alara and eventually removing Kael from power. It was treason, complete, unambiguous treason, and Alara had no proof beyond servant gossip and her own deductions. She sat in her room that night, staring at the evidence she'd gathered, fragments, suggestions, nothing concrete enough to bring to Kael's council. They already doubted her. If she accused a duke's daughter of treason without solid proof, they'd call her paranoid, delusional. Exactly what her old pack had claimed. But if she did nothing and Helena's plan succeeded, the knock on her door made her jump. Alara, it's Kael. Can I come in? She opened the door. He stood there in simple clothes, no crown, no formal trappings. Just a man who looked tired and worried. I heard you've been asking questions about Helena, he said without preamble. Marcus told me. He has servants who report to him. Of course he does. Alara, what's going on? She made a decision, pulled him inside and told him everything, every fragment of evidence, every suspicion, every terrifying possibility. He listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each word. You should have told me immediately, he said when she finished. I needed to be sure. I needed to have more than just suspicions before accusing a duke's daughter of treason. You still should have told me. But his voice was gentle. Alara, you don't have to fight alone anymore. That's the whole point. I know. I needed to prove I could handle it, that I'm not just someone who needs constant protection. You've already proven that. He touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. You've proven it every single day since you stepped into my firelight. But strength isn't about facing everything alone. It's about knowing when to ask for help. Before she could respond, shouting erupted in the hallway. Then screaming. Kael's hand went to the sword he'd started wearing again. Stay here. Not a chance. They ran toward the commotion, emerging into chaos. Soldiers running, servants fleeing. And at the center, in the great hall, Helena stood on the raised dais beside a man in Southern Coalition colors. Treason! Someone shouted. Helena's laugh was wild, unhinged. Treason? I'm saving this kingdom from a weak king who'd destroy everything our ancestors built for the sake of a worthless Omega. The Southern soldier beside her drew his sword. By order of the Coalition Council, we're here to arrest King Kael Draven for war crimes and to liberate the Northern clans from his corrupt rule. More soldiers poured through a side entrance. Southern colors, dozens of them. Someone had opened the gates from inside. The fortress was under attack, and Helena had sold them out completely. Kael's soldiers rallied, forming a defensive line, but they were scattered, unprepared. The Southern forces had surprise and inside knowledge. You did this? Kael said to Helena, his voice carrying across the hall. You betrayed your own people. I saved them from you. Helena's composure shattered completely. You've gone soft, weak, choosing an Omega nobody over the good of the kingdom. You don't deserve the crown. And you deserve a traitor's death. The fighting erupted in earnest, steel clashing, men shouting, blood beginning to spill on ancient stone. Alara stood frozen for one terrible moment, watching the chaos unfold. This was her fault. Helena had done this because of her, because Kael had defended her, because she'd disrupted their precious hierarchy. She could run, should run, hide in her rooms and let the alphas fight their wars. Instead, she ran toward the fighting. Alara, no! Kael's shout came too late. She'd seen something the warriors hadn't, a group of southern soldiers moving toward the eastern corridor. The corridor that led to the armory. If they took that, they'd have access to the fortress's entire weapons cache. She intercepted them at the corridor entrance, standing alone in their path. The lead soldier laughed. An Omega? Step aside, girl, unless you want to die. I've survived worse than you, Alara said quietly. Then she pulled the knife Margaret had given her, the one she'd carried every day since arriving, and attacked. She fought like someone with nothing left to lose, like someone who'd learned combat not in training halls but in dark forests where mistakes meant death. She wasn't strong, wasn't trained, but she was fast and desperate and absolutely refused to let them pass. The first soldier went down with her knife in his throat. The second took a kick to the knee that shattered bone. The third managed to slash her arm, but she used the pain, channeled it, drove her blade up under his ribs. By the time Kael's soldiers reached her, 3 enemy warriors lay bleeding, and the corridor was secure. But Alara was swaying, blood running down her arm, shock beginning to set in. Kael caught her before she fell, his face white with terror and fury. You complete idiot, he breathed. You beautiful, insane, brave idiot. Stop them, she managed. Armory's safe. You almost died. Almost doesn't count. Around them, the battle was turning. Kael's forces, rallying from the initial surprise, were pushing back the invaders. Helena was being dragged away in chains, still screaming about betrayal and weakness. But Alara barely noticed. She was staring at Kael, at his face, at the raw emotion written across every feature. I'm tired of almost losing you, he said roughly. I'm tired of watching you risk everything. I'm tired of pretending this is just gratitude or duty or political convenience. Kael, I love you. The words came out fierce, absolute. I love your strength and your courage, and the way you refuse to break no matter what the world throws at you. I love that you charged into battle to protect my fortress. I love that you saved my life and changed everything and made me remember what actually matters. Alara's breath caught. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met. I know you make me want to be better. I know that when I thought you might die just now, I couldn't breathe. His hand cupped her face. Tell me I'm alone in this. Tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll back away. But tell me the truth. She should deny it, should protect herself, should remember that love was dangerous, that trust was foolish, that nothing good lasted. But she was so tired of should. I love you too, she whispered. And it terrifies me. He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, while around them the fortress burned and bled and fought. And in that moment, something shifted irrevocably. She wasn't just Alara the survivor anymore. She was Alara who stood and fought. Alara who loved and was loved. Alara who'd rewritten her entire story in blood and firelight and impossible choices. The battle raged on, the outcome still uncertain, the future still dangerous. But for the first time in her life, Alara faced it without fear. Because she wasn't alone anymore. And that changed everything. And that changed everything. The fortress halls echoed with the sounds of surrender. Southern soldiers throwing down weapons, raising empty hands. Kael's forces had fought with the fury of men defending their home, and the invaders, already demoralized by losing their element of surprise, crumbled quickly once their momentum broke. Dr. Renfield appeared through the smoke and chaos, her face grim. Let me see that arm. Alara looked down, surprised by how much blood had soaked through her sleeve. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving pain in its wake. It's not that bad. I'll determine what's bad and what isn't. The physician pulled her toward a cleared space, already calling for supplies. Your Majesty, you're bleeding again too. I'm fine. You're both idiots with hero complexes. But Renfield's hands were gentle as she cut away Alara's sleeve, revealing a deep gash that would definitely need stitching. Hold still. This is going to hurt. Kael stayed close while the doctor worked, his hand finding Alara's free one. Around them, soldiers moved through the hall, securing prisoners, checking the wounded, extinguishing small fires. The battle had lasted less than 20 minutes, but the damage would take weeks to repair.
How many did we lose? Kyle asked quietly as Marcus approached. 14 dead, 32 wounded. Marcus's face was grave. Could have been much worse. If they'd reached the armory, he looked at Alara with something that might have been respect. You saved lives tonight. Stopping those soldiers prevented a massacre. I just did what needed doing. Alara winced as Renfield pulled the first stitch tight. Most people wouldn't have, Marcus said. Most Omegas would have hidden. Even most trained soldiers might have hesitated against those odds. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I owe you an apology. I questioned your presence here, questioned your motives, but someone who fights like that, who risks everything for people she barely knows, that's not manipulation. That's character. The admission clearly cost him. Alara met his eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There's still a mess to clean up. Marcus turned to Kael. Helena's in custody, along with 17 Southern soldiers. The rest are dead or fled. But we need to move quickly. The Southern Coalition will claim this was an unauthorized raid, that they had nothing to do with it. Then we make sure everyone knows the truth. Kael's voice was hard. Gather the council, every noble in the fortress. We're doing this publicly. An hour later, the Great Hall had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Helena stood in chains at the center, her perfect hair disheveled, her silk dress torn and blood-stained. The crowd packed in, nobles, soldiers, servants, everyone who could fit, their faces ranging from shock to fury to grim satisfaction. Kyle stood before his throne, still in his battle-stained clothes, looking every inch the warrior king. Alara stood beside him, her bandaged arm a visible reminder of the night's violence. Helena Marsh, Kael's voice rang out clear and cold. You stand accused of treason, of conspiring with enemy forces, of deliberately compromising this fortress's security and causing the deaths of 14 loyal soldiers. How do you answer? Helena's laugh was brittle, fractured. Guilty. Absolutely guilty. And I'd do it again. Gasps rippled through the crowd. You admit it? Lord Garrett looked stunned. Why not? You're going to execute me anyway. Helena's eyes fixed on Alara with pure hatred. I did what was necessary, what none of you had the courage to do. This Omega, she spat the word like poison, has corrupted our king, made him weak, turned him against his own people for the sake of a worthless... Enough, Kael's voice cracked like a whip. You don't speak for my people. You speak for your own wounded pride and toxic delusions about hierarchy. I speak for tradition, for the natural order. Helena strained against her chains. Omegas serve. Alphas rule. That's how it's always been, how it should always be. But you've elevated this nobody, given her power she doesn't deserve. And for what? Because she spread her legs. The slap came from an unexpected source. Lady Thorne, the trade minister, had moved so fast her hand was still raised when Helena's head snapped to the side. That's enough vulgarity, Thorne said coldly. Whatever your grievances, you betrayed us all. You brought enemy soldiers into our home. You caused the deaths of men who trusted you, who served your family loyally. She looked at Kael. Your Majesty, I formally recommend execution, immediately. Murmurs of agreement swept the hall, but Kael held up a hand. No. Silence. No? Garrett leaned forward. Your Majesty, treason demands... I know what it demands, but I won't give her the quick dignity of execution. Kael's eyes were ice. Helena Marsh, I strip you of your title, your lands, your family name. Everything you claimed made you better than others. Gone. You'll be sent to the northern labor camps for life. You'll work alongside the people you considered beneath you. And every day you'll remember that your pride destroyed you more thoroughly than any Omega ever could. Helena's face went white. You can't. I'm the Alpha King. I can do whatever I want. Kael gestured to the guards. Take her away. I'm done looking at her. As Helena was dragged from the hall, still screaming protests, Kael turned to address the crowd.
Let this be a lesson. Hierarchy has its place. Tradition has value. But when we use them as excuses for cruelty, for hatred, for betraying our own people, we become everything our enemies claim we are. He reached for Alara's hand, pulling her forward. She wanted to resist, to stay in the background, but his grip was firm. This Omega saved my life. Tonight she saved many of yours. She's shown more courage, more loyalty, more genuine strength than half the nobles who claim superiority based on bloodlines alone. His voice carried to every corner of the hall. From this moment forward, Alara Voss is under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens her, insults her, or questions her place here answers to me. Is that understood? Silence. Then slowly people began to nod. Some reluctantly, others with what looked like genuine acceptance. Lord Chen stood, his aged face thoughtful. Your Majesty, if I may speak? Go ahead. I've served 3 kings. Your grandfather, your father, and now you. And I've watched each struggle with the same fundamental question. How do we honor tradition while still growing, changing, becoming better? He looked at Alara. Your grandfather would have executed her for defending herself against an alpha. Your father would have sent her away to avoid political complications. But you chose a different path, a harder path. Is there a point to this history lesson? Kael asked, though his tone wasn't unkind. The point is that perhaps it's time we reconsidered some of our oldest assumptions. If an Omega can fight like a trained warrior, can save the king's life with medical skill, can show strategic thinking that prevented a massacre, then maybe our hierarchy has been built on flawed foundations. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Other council members exchanged glances. The crowd murmured, Are you suggesting we abolish pack structure entirely? Garrett sounded somewhere between horrified and intrigued. I'm suggesting we stop using it as an excuse to waste talent. Chen gestured to Alara. How many other capable Omegas have we discarded because they didn't fit our narrow definitions? How much potential have we thrown away in the name of tradition? This is madness, someone shouted from the crowd. Omegas exist to serve, to nurture. That's their nature. My nature, Alara heard herself say, her voice carrying despite her fear, was to survive 6 years alone in wilderness that kills trained alphas. My nature was to learn healing because no one else would help me. My nature was to fight tonight because it was right, not because some hierarchy told me to. She looked around the hall, meeting hostile eyes and curious ones alike. I'm not saying hierarchy is wrong. I'm saying maybe it shouldn't be a cage. Maybe people should be judged by what they do, not what they're born as. Well said. Dr. Renfield had appeared at the edge of the crowd. If we're sharing opinions, I'll add mine. This Omega has more natural healing talent than most trained physicians I've met. She learns faster, retains better, and has instincts you can't teach. I formally requested she be allowed to study medicine properly, not as my assistant, as my apprentice, my successor. The murmurs grew louder. An Omega physician? Unheard of. Scandalous. I support this, Renfield continued, and I'll go further. If the council rejects it purely because of her designation as Omega, then you're all fools throwing away a genuinely gifted healer out of pride. Margaret stepped forward next, her household keys jingling. I've run this fortress's staff for 30 years. I've seen hundreds of nobles come through these halls, and I'll tell you something true. Character isn't about bloodlines. It's about choices. Lady Helena had every advantage. Best family, best education, best opportunities, and she chose treason. Alara had nothing and chose courage. If that's not worth recognizing, I don't know what is. One by one, people began speaking up. A soldier who'd fought beside Alara during the battle. A servant she'd helped when he'd cut himself in the kitchens. A junior council member who'd watched her sit quietly through meetings, asking smart questions, never demanding attention. The tide was shifting. Slowly, incrementally, but unmistakably shifting. Kael watched it happen with something like wonder on his face. It seems, he said quietly, that Alara has more supporters than either of us realized. Or maybe, Lord Chen suggested, people were waiting for permission to acknowledge what they already knew, that the old ways needed changing. They just needed someone brave enough to start. Then let's make it official. Kael straightened despite his obvious pain. I'm establishing a new position, Royal Advisor for Pack Welfare. Someone who will investigate Omega treatment across all northern clans. Someone who will make sure what happened to Alara, false accusations, expulsion, abuse, doesn't happen to others. He looked at Alara. The position is yours if you want it. Real power, real authority, a chance to change things. Alara's breath caught. I don't know anything about politics or... You know about survival, about what it's like to be discarded and dismissed. That's exactly the perspective we need. Kale's eyes were steady. You don't have to decide now, think about it. But know that I'm serious. This isn't charity or pity. It's recognizing that you have value this kingdom desperately needs. Before she could respond, Marcus cleared his throat. Your Majesty, there's another matter. The Southern Coalition will need to answer for tonight's attack. Even if they claim it was unauthorized, soldiers wearing their colors invaded our fortress. That's an act of war. I know. Kael's expression hardened. Send word to their council. They have 1 week to deliver a formal apology and war reparations, or we resume hostilities. Make it clear that this isn't a negotiation. They'll refuse, probably claim Helena acted alone, that they had no knowledge, then let them refuse. We have witnesses. We have prisoners who'll talk once they realize their coalition won't rescue them. We have the truth. Kael's smile was sharp. And thanks to Alara securing the armory, we still have all our weapons. If they want another war, we're ready. The meeting dissolved into logistics after that. Reparations amounts, witness testimonies, diplomatic channels. Alara felt herself fading, exhaustion and blood loss catching up with her. Kael noticed immediately. Council's dismissed. Continue this tomorrow. Doctor, make sure both patients actually rest this time. Renfield snorted. I'll do my best, though neither of you is particularly good at following medical advice. Back in Alara's rooms, now guarded by 2 loyal soldiers Kael had personally selected, she finally allowed herself to collapse. The bed felt impossibly soft after the night's violence. Kael sat beside her, careful of both their injuries. You shouldn't have charged into battle like that. You shouldn't have torn your stitches confronting the Eastern Ridge Pack. We're both terrible at self-preservation. Apparently. She turned to look at him. Did you mean it? The advisor position? It wasn't just dramatic posturing for the crowd? I never do dramatic posturing. At her look, he amended, Okay, rarely. But yes, I meant it. Alara, you've lived what most Omegas only whisper about in private. You know the system's flaws intimately, and you survived despite them. That's the expertise we need to fix things. Your council will fight me at every turn. Probably, but I'll fight beside you. His hand found hers. We don't have to solve everything immediately, small changes, one reform at a time. Eventually, it adds up to something revolutionary. You make it sound possible. It is possible, you're the proof. He leaned forward, wincing at his ribs. Tonight proved something important, not just to me, to everyone watching. An Omega fought like a warrior, strategized like a general, showed courage that shamed half the trained soldiers. They can't unsee that. Can't pretend it didn't happen. Helena will inspire others like her, people who think tradition matters more than justice. Let them come, we'll face them together. His kiss was gentle, careful of her exhaustion. Rest now. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. But tonight, just rest. He started to leave, but her hand caught his. Stay, please. Alara, propriety. Damn propriety. I almost died tonight. You almost died. I don't want to be alone. Something in his expression softened completely. Neither do I. He stretched out beside her on top of the covers, fully clothed, carefully positioned to avoid jostling either of their wounds. His arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm. This is going to be complicated, Alara whispered into the darkness. Everything worth doing is complicated. Your nobles will cause problems. They already cause problems. At least now it's for a good reason. Kael? Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. His arm tightened slightly. Thank you for saving my life, for staying when leaving would have been safer, for being brave enough to hope that things could be different. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the fortress settle around them. Outside, guards called watch changes. Somewhere distant, someone was singing a victory song, the sounds of normal life resuming after crisis. Alara felt herself drifting, finally safe enough to truly rest. But one thought stayed with her as sleep pulled her under. She'd gone from invisible to undeniable, from cast off to counselor, from surviving alone to building something new beside someone who valued her completely. The forest had taught her to endure, but Kael had taught her something more important. She deserved to do more than endure. She deserved to thrive. 3 days later, Alara stood in the council chamber wearing formal robes in deep blue, the color of advisors. The council members sat in their usual places, though several faces were new. Helena's father, the Duke of Western Reach, had been stripped of his position for failing to prevent his daughter's treason. 2 other nobles who'd supported Helena's anti-Omega rhetoric had quietly resigned. The remaining council members watched Alara with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "Your Majesty," Lord Garrett began carefully, "while we appreciate Alara's contributions during the recent crisis, formally installing her as an advisor seems premature. Perhaps a trial period." "No trial period." Kael's voice was firm. "She's proven herself more than adequately. Or do you need another demonstration of her capabilities?" "It's not her capabilities we question. It's the precedent. An Omega in an official advisory role is exactly the precedent I want to set." Kael leaned back in his chair. The northern clans claim to value strength, resilience, strategic thinking. Alara has demonstrated all 3. If you're going to argue against her appointment, use actual reasons, not just tradition says no. Silence. Then Lady Thorne spoke, her voice thoughtful. "What exactly would this advisor position entail? Specifically, what authority would she have?" "Good question." Kael nodded to Alara. "Would you like to answer that?" Alara took a breath, steadying herself. "I'd investigate Omega treatment across all Northern Clan territories. Look into expulsions, accusations of violence or instability, patterns of abuse being covered up. Interview Omegas privately, away from pack authorities who might intimidate them. Recommend policy changes. Propose new protections." "That's extensive authority," Garrett said slowly. "It needs to be. The problem is extensive." Alara met his eyes. "Right now, Omegas have almost no recourse when Alphas abuse power. They can't appeal to higher authorities because the authorities are all Alphas who benefit from the current system. They can't organize because gathering without Alpha supervision is often prohibited. They can't even speak freely because questioning hierarchy is treated as mental instability." "Surely you're exaggerating. Am I?" Alara's voice sharpened. "I was expelled for defending myself against sexual assault. The Eastern Ridge Pack falsified evidence and branded me violent to protect an Alpha's reputation. How many other Omegas have similar stories? How many just accepted their fate because fighting back seemed hopeless?" Lord Chen stirred. "She makes valid points. We've all heard whispers about various packs treating Omegas poorly, but without formal investigation, without someone dedicated to the issue, nothing changes." "It'll cause problems," another council member warned. "Alphas don't like being questioned. Pack leaders will see this as interference in internal affairs. Then they'll have to adjust." Kael's tone left no room for argument. "I'm Alpha King. My authority supersedes individual pack leaders. If they're abusing Omegas and hiding behind pack autonomy, that ends now." "This could split the northern clans," Garrett said quietly. "Some packs will resist. Could even lead to rebellion. Or," Lady Thorne countered, "it could strengthen us. How much talent are we wasting by keeping half our population subjugated? How many brilliant healers, strategists, leaders are we losing because we've decided Omegas can't be those things?" She looked at Alara. "I've been thinking about this since the battle. My daughter is Omega, gentle, nurturing, everything tradition says she should be. But she's also clever with numbers, can calculate trade routes and profit margins faster than my trained accountants. I've never let her use those skills because it wasn't appropriate. After watching you fight, watching you think, I realized how stupid that is." The admission hung in the air. "I'll support this appointment," Thorne continued, "with one condition. You can't just focus on problems. You need to show solutions. Prove that elevating Omegas benefits everyone, not just Omegas themselves." "Agreed," Alara said immediately. "I'm not interested in revenge or retribution. I want actual improvement, systems that work better for everyone." Marcus had been silent throughout, watching carefully. Now he spoke. I'll support it as well. But I want regular reports, transparency about investigations. And if you find major abuses in powerful packs, you bring them to this council before taking action. No vigilante justice. Fair enough? Alara could work within those boundaries. One by one, the council members agreed. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly, but all agreeing nonetheless. When the vote was called, it passed unanimously. Kael smiled. Then it's official. Alara Voss, Royal Advisor for Pack Welfare. Congratulations. The formal ceremony was small but significant. Kael placed the advisor's chain of office around her neck, heavy silver links bearing the Northern Clan's wolf seal. The weight felt immense, not physically, but symbolically. She was officially part of the power structure now, no longer an outsider looking in, but someone with real authority to make real changes. That night, a feast was held in her honor. Nothing extravagant, the fortress was still recovering from the attack, but enough to mark the occasion. Nobles who'd sneered at her weeks ago now approached with careful politeness. Some were clearly just covering their backs, but others seemed genuinely curious about her plans. Start small, Lord Chen advised over wine. Pick one pack, investigate thoroughly, implement changes there first. Use it as a model for others. Any suggestions which pack? Eastern Ridge. His smile was sharp. They already have a history of corruption you've documented. Clean them up, remove the Alpha and his son if necessary, install new leadership, send a message that the old ways won't be tolerated. Alara considered it. That feels personal, like revenge. Sometimes justice and revenge align. Chen sipped his wine. But if it bothers you, choose a different pack. The important thing is showing results quickly. Give the council something concrete to point to when other packs complain. She filed the advice away, already thinking through possibilities. Dr. Renfield found her later, looking pleased. I heard the news. My apprentice is now a royal advisor. I'm either the luckiest teacher in the kingdom or the most burdened. Definitely burdened, Alara grinned. I still need to continue my medical training. This advisor position can't be my only skill. Good, because I'm not letting you quit just when you were getting interesting. Renfield handed her a glass. To new beginnings and shattered precedents. They drank to that. Kael found her on the balcony as the feast wound down, the stars bright overhead despite the cold. You look natural in there, he said, joining her at the railing. Like you belonged. I felt terrified the entire time. But being terrified and doing it anyway is basically the definition of courage. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You're going to be remarkable at this, you know. Or I'll fail spectacularly and prove everyone who doubted me right. Even if you fail, which you won't, you'll fail while trying to help people. That's noble regardless of outcome. He turned her to face him. Alara, I need you to understand something. This position, this authority, it's not a gift I'm giving you. It's recognition of what you already are. You earned this. Every hard year of survival, every moment you chose compassion over bitterness, every time you refused to let the world break you, that's what earned this. Tears pricked her eyes. I'm not used to people believing in me. Get used to it, because I believe in you completely, and soon, so will everyone else. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while above them stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and below the fortress hummed with life renewed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, resistant packs, hostile alphas, entrenched traditions that wouldn't change easily. The road ahead was long and steep and treacherous. But tonight, Alara stood on a balcony wearing an advisor's chain, held by someone who loved her completely, surrounded by a fortress that was slowly, grudgingly, beginning to accept her. She'd survived the wilderness alone. Now she would transform a kingdom with help. And for the first time in her entire life, that felt not just possible, but inevitable. The Omega who was supposed to disappear had become undeniable. And she was just getting started. And she was just getting started. The words became Alara's mantra over the following months as she threw herself into work that felt both impossible and necessary. Her first official act as royal advisor for pack welfare was to establish safe channels for Omegas to report abuse, anonymous letters delivered to trusted intermediaries, private interviews conducted away from pack territories, protection guaranteed for anyone who came forward. The responses flooded in faster than she'd anticipated. 17 letters in the first week, she told Kyle one evening, spreading them across his desk. And these are just from the capital region. Once word spreads further, Kale read through them, his expression growing darker with each page. Stories of forced matings, of Omegas beaten for questioning orders, of children taken away as punishment for disobedience. The systematic cruelty was breathtaking in its scope. We knew it was bad, he said quietly, but seeing it documented like this
makes it real, makes it undeniable. Alara gathered the letters carefully. I want to start with the Northern Ridge Pack. 3 separate Omegas have reported their alpha for physical abuse. One is only 16. Northern Ridge's alpha is Garrett's cousin. This will cause political problems. Everything we do will cause political problems. She met his eyes. Are we doing this or not? His smile was grim. We're doing this. I'll inform Garrett personally.
Give him a chance to handle it quietly before we make it public. But Lord Garrett, when summoned, didn't take the news quietly. My cousin is a respected alpha, he thundered in the council chamber. You're going to destroy his reputation based on anonymous accusations from Omegas who probably just want attention. These aren't accusations seeking attention. Alara kept her voice level despite her rising anger. They're detailed accounts with specific dates, witnesses, physical evidence. One Omega has scars from whip marks. Another has medical records of broken bones that accidentally happened multiple times. Omegas are fragile. Accidents happen. The same accidents repeatedly, always after the Omega in question questioned the Alpha's authority. She pushed the documentation across the table. Read them yourself. Then tell me these are accidents. Garrett read, his face shifting from anger to discomfort to reluctant acknowledgement. Even if this is true, and I'm not saying it is, removing an alpha based on Omega testimony sets a dangerous precedent. It undermines pack authority. Good, Kale said flatly. If pack authority means protecting abusers, it should be undermined. Garrett, I'm giving you 48 hours. Either your cousin voluntarily steps down and faces justice, or I remove him by force and investigate your entire family line for similar patterns. That's blackmail. That's leadership. Kale's voice was cold. Choose. Garrett chose family reputation over justice, as Alara had predicted. Within 2 days, the Northern Ridge Alpha had quietly retired due to health concerns, and his Beta, a more moderate leader who'd privately opposed the abuse, took over. The transition was smooth, barely noticed by those outside the pack. But the Omegas noticed. Letters of gratitude arrived. Stories of small improvements. An Omega allowed to speak at pack meetings. Another permitted to pursue education. A third no longer forced into an unwanted mating. Tiny changes that meant everything to the people experiencing them. It's working, Margaret said during one of their regular meetings. She'd become an unofficial advisor, her decades of observing court politics proving invaluable. Slowly, but it's working. Other packs are watching. Some are making changes preemptively to avoid investigation. And others are digging in harder. Alara showed her a letter from the Western Summit Pack, essentially telling her to stay away or face consequences. They're organizing resistance, calling me a radical who's destroying tradition. Let them. Every movement has opposition. The question is whether you have enough support to weather it. The answer came unexpectedly during a formal council session 2 months into Alara's tenure. Lady Thorne stood, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Your Majesty, I have a request. My daughter Arya wishes to address the council. Murmurs of surprise. Omegas didn't address the council. Ever. But Kyle simply nodded. Let her speak. Arya Thorne entered with her mother, a young woman of perhaps 20, with her mother's sharp eyes and her father's gentle bearing. She curtsied to Kyle, then turned to face the council with remarkable composure. My lords and ladies, I come before you to request formal recognition as an apprentice trade analyst. For the past 5 years, I've been studying our kingdom's commerce routes, profit margins, resource distribution. I've identified 17 inefficiencies that, if corrected, could increase crown revenue by approximately 30%. Stunned silence. I've prepared a full report. Arya placed a thick folder on the table. But I'm aware that tradition says Omegas shouldn't engage in such work. I'm here to argue that tradition is costing us dearly. My analysis represents hundreds of hours of research that our official analysts missed because they were busy with other duties. Imagine how much more we could achieve if we utilized all available talent, regardless of designation. Lord Chen picked up the report, flipping through pages of detailed calculations and projections. His eyebrows rose steadily higher.
This is remarkably thorough. Your Majesty, with your permission, I'd like to review this properly. Granted. Kale looked at Arya with undisguised approval. And regardless of the Council's decision, I want to thank you for your courage in presenting this. Thank Alara, Arya said simply. If she hadn't shown that Omegas could do more, could be more, I'd never have had the courage to try. The report proved accurate. Every single inefficiency Arya had identified was confirmed by independent analysis. Within a month, she had an official position as junior trade analyst, working directly under her mother. The appointment sparked controversy, but the 30% revenue increase silenced most critics. More importantly, it opened floodgates. An Omega from the Eastern Valley requested permission to study architecture after noticing structural flaws in her pack's housing that caused preventable winter deaths. Another wanted to become a diplomat, having taught herself 4 languages through traded books. A third had been secretly developing better crop rotation techniques and wanted to share them officially. Talent everywhere, previously wasted because tradition said it shouldn't exist. Kael established a formal office for Alara's work, 3 rooms in the fortress's administrative wing, staffed by 2 assistants and a secretary. The physical space made the position real in a way that had seemed impossible months ago. You're building an empire, Dr. Renfield observed during one of their medical training sessions. A quiet revolution, one reformed pack at a time. It doesn't feel quiet. Alara sutured a practice wound on a cadaver, her stitches now nearly as precise as Renfield's own. Every change sparks 10 new fights. Every success breeds new resistance. Welcome to meaningful work. It's never easy and rarely appreciated until decades later. The physician checked Alara's stitching with critical eyes. Perfect tension. You've surpassed me in surgical technique. How does it feel to be better than your teacher? Terrifying.
What if I make a mistake during actual surgery? Then you'll learn from it, same as I did. The difference between you and most students is you've already faced life or death situations and made good decisions under pressure. Trust that. Renfield began cleaning up the instruments. Speaking of which, there's a request from the military. They want you to train field medics in your wilderness medicine techniques. Apparently, your survival stitching has a higher success rate than standard military protocols. Alara felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by doubt. I'm not qualified to teach. You're the most qualified person in the kingdom to teach survival medicine. You invented half these techniques out of necessity. Renfield gave her a stern look. Stop underselling yourself. It's unbecoming for someone who fought off 3 enemy soldiers and saved the king's life. The teaching opportunity led to another realization. The more visible Alara became, the more dangerous her position grew. The assassination attempt came during her visit to the Southern Approach Pack, 3 months after her appointment. She'd gone to investigate reports of Omega children being separated from their mothers as punishment for disobedience. The Pack Alpha, a brutal man named Torvin, had agreed to the investigation with barely concealed hostility. Check whatever you want, he'd growled. You'll find nothing wrong. My pack runs according to proper tradition. Alara had interviewed 5 Omegas privately that afternoon. All told the same story. Children routinely taken away for days or weeks, kept in isolation, used as leverage to ensure Omega compliance. The cruelty was systematic and deliberate. She was walking back to her guest quarters when they struck. 3 alphas, faces covered, moving with the coordinated efficiency of trained fighters. The first one grabbed her from behind, hand over her mouth. The second produced a knife. But 6 years of wilderness survival had taught Alara that predators always underestimated prey. She drove her elbow back into the first attacker's ribs, then down into his instep. As he loosened his grip, she dropped low and rolled, avoiding the knife by inches. Her hand found the blade she always carried now, a gift from Kael, balanced and deadly. The fight was brief and vicious. She wasn't strong enough to overpower them, but she was faster, more desperate, and willing to fight with a ferocity that caught them off guard. One attacker went down with her knife in his thigh. Another stumbled back, clutching a face she'd raked with her nails. The third hesitated, just for a moment. It was enough. KL's soldiers, assigned as her protective detail, arrived at a full run. The attackers fled, leaving one wounded man behind. He talked quickly once in prison, desperate to avoid execution. Alpha Torvin had hired them, paid gold to remove the problematic advisor before she could file her report. Others were involved. A network of traditionalist alphas who'd decided Alara was too dangerous to live. The revelation sparked the crisis Alara had been dreading. Kale convened an emergency council session, his fury barely contained. They tried to murder a royal advisor, under my protection, in a pact territory I oversee. This is beyond political disagreement. This is treason. Technically, Marcus said carefully, it's an internal pact matter that escalated. It's attempted murder of a crown official. Kale slammed his hand on the table. Stop making excuses. Torvin hired assassins. He confessed. What more do you need? Lord Garrett looked uncomfortable. Your Majesty, if we come down too hard on Torvin, the traditionalist pacts will see it as persecution. They're already calling Alara's reforms an attack on pack autonomy, executing an alpha for defending his territory. He wasn't defending his territory. He was trying to kill someone investigating child abuse. Kael's voice was ice. Are we really going to debate whether that deserves punishment? Of course not. But the optics of... Damn the optics! Alara stood, her bandaged arm, injured again during the fight, making the gesture sharp and angry. I'm tired of dancing around this. Half the council knows the traditionalists are organizing against us. They're not just resisting reform, they're actively plotting violence. And we keep treating them like reasonable people having legitimate disagreements. Because declaring open conflict would split the northern clans, Lady Thorne said quietly. We'd have civil war. We're already heading toward civil war. Alara gestured to her injuries. They tried to kill me. Next time they might succeed, or they'll target other Omegas who've spoken out, or Arya, or anyone else threatening their power. When does caution become cowardice? The words hung heavy in the sudden silence. Finally, Lord Chen spoke. She's right. We've been avoiding the real issue. There's a fundamental incompatibility between the kingdom Alara is building and the kingdom traditionalists want to preserve. Eventually, one vision has to win. Then let's make sure it's the right one. Kale's decision was written across his face. Here's what we're doing. Torvin is arrested and tried for attempted murder. If convicted, which he will be given the confession, he's executed publicly. We use this as a line in the sand. Any pact that retaliates faces the full weight of Crown military intervention. That's a declaration of war against the traditionalists, Garrett warned. No, it's a declaration that law applies equally to everyone, even alphas who think they're above it. Kale looked around the table. I need to know where everyone stands. Are you with me on this? Truly with me? Because if we do this, there's no going back. One by one, the council members voiced their positions. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly, but when the count finished, the vote was 7-2 in favor. The dissenters, both older lords with deep traditionalist ties, resigned immediately. We cannot support this path, one said stiffly. It leads to chaos. Then I wish you well in retirement, Kael replied without emotion. Your service is noted. After they left, Marcus leaned back heavily. We just divided the kingdom. You know that, right? The kingdom was already divided, Alara said quietly. We just made the division visible. The trial of Alpha Torvin became a flashpoint that crystallized everything into sharp focus. The traditionalist pacts sent representatives to protest, claiming royal overreach. Progressive pacts sent witnesses supporting the crown. Omegas traveled from across the kingdom to watch, some risking punishment from their own alphas just to witness an alpha finally held accountable. The fortress's great hall was packed beyond capacity when Kael opened proceedings. We are here, he began, his voice carrying to every corner, to determine whether Alpha Torvin committed attempted murder against royal advisor Alara Voss. The facts are not in dispute. The hired assassin has confessed. Witnesses saw the attack. The only question is whether Torvin believed himself above crown law. Torvin's defense argued pack autonomy, traditional rights, that Alara's investigation itself was an illegal intrusion justifying defensive action. Then Alara testified. She described the Omega mothers she'd interviewed, their voices breaking as they talked about children being taken. She detailed the systematic cruelty, the psychological torture, the way power had been weaponized against the vulnerable, and she spoke directly to Torvin, her voice steady and cold. You didn't try to kill me because I threatened your pack. You tried to kill me because I threatened your ability to abuse without consequences. You're not a defender of tradition. You're a coward who hurt children to maintain control. Torvin lunged at her, screaming obscenities. Guards restrained him, but the damage was done. His rage, his complete lack of remorse, his violent response to being challenged, it all played out before hundreds of witnesses. The verdict was unanimous, guilty. The sentence was death. And when the traditionalist packs threatened rebellion, Kael called their bluff. Any pack that takes up arms against crown law will be met with overwhelming force. Any alpha who supports assassinating crown officials will be treated as a traitor. This isn't negotiable. You have 1 week to decide whether you're part of the northern clans or enemies of it. The week passed in tense silence. Then slowly, the traditionalists backed down. Not because they agreed, but because they recognized they'd lost. Public opinion had turned against them. Too many witnesses to Torvin's cruelty. Too many Omegas coming forward with their own stories. Too much evidence that the old ways caused real suffering. Alpha Torvin was executed at dawn on a cold winter morning. Alara didn't watch. She'd seen enough death, but she felt the shift it created, the understanding rippling through the kingdom that something fundamental had changed, that Omegas were no longer property to be abused, that power had limits, that justice could reach even the most protected abusers. It's not over, Kael said that evening as they stood together on the balcony where they'd shared so many quiet moments. The traditionalists will regroup, find new strategies. This fight will continue for years. I know. Alara leaned against him, drawing warmth from his solid presence. But we won something important today. We proved that change is possible, that the system can be challenged and beaten. We proved more than that. He turned her to face him. We proved that you were right all along, that an Omega from nowhere with nothing but courage and conviction could reshape an entire kingdom. I didn't do it alone. No, but you started it. You were the spark. His hands cupped her face gently. Alara Voss, 6 months ago, you were a stranger asking for warmth by my fire. Now you're the most powerful person in this kingdom besides me. How does that feel? She considered the question seriously. Terrifying. Overwhelming, right. Good, because I have a question to ask you, and I need you feeling all three. He took a breath, and Alara realized with shock that he was nervous. Marry me. The world seemed to tilt. What? Marry me. Not because tradition demands it, not because politics require it, but because I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life building this better kingdom beside you. His smile was crooked, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. I'm not asking you to be a decorative queen. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, the person who challenges me and changes me and makes me want to be the king this kingdom deserves. Alara felt tears gathering. Your council will lose their minds. My council can adapt or resign. I don't care. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. I need to know what you want. Not what's expected or proper or politically wise. What do you want? What did she want? She wanted the impossible dream that had seemed so far away when she was alone in the forest, cold and hungry and convinced she'd die unmourned. She wanted love that saw her clearly and valued her completely. She wanted to keep building this new world where Omegas could be healers and advisors and anything else they were capable of becoming. She wanted to wake up beside this man who'd defended her when it cost him, who'd believed in her when she didn't believe in herself, who'd helped her transform from survivor to revolutionary. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. His kiss was fierce and tender and full of promise. Behind them, the fortress blazed with lights. Below them, the city sprawled in all its complicated glory, traditional and progressive, resistant and hopeful, slowly, painfully evolving. The wedding 3 months later was everything traditional royal weddings weren't. Instead of the Great Hall, they held it in the fortress courtyard under open sky. Instead of only nobles, they invited everyone, soldiers and servants, reformed alphas and grateful omegas, healers and farmers and merchants. Dr. Renfield officiated, since religious ceremonies felt wrong for something this personal.
Marriage, Renfield said in her practical voice, is a choice to see someone clearly, their flaws and strengths, and commit to growing together anyway. These two have already survived war and assassination attempts and political upheaval together. I think they can handle everyday life. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Alara wore blue instead of white, her advisor's chain visible over the wedding dress. Kael wore his crown, but also a simple soldier's insignia, a reminder that kings could be warriors, protectors, partners instead of just rulers. When they exchanged vows, Alara spoke from the heart. I promise to tell you truth even when it's uncomfortable, to challenge you when you need it, and support you always, to build this kingdom into something worthy of the people who believed in us when belief seemed foolish. Kael's vows were simpler. I promise to see you, value you, and love you exactly as you are, to stand beside you in every fight worth fighting, to never let you face the darkness alone again. The cheers when they kissed echoed off the fortress walls. The celebration lasted all day and into the night. Arya Thorne, now a full trade analyst, presented them with a detailed economic forecast showing how Omega advancement had boosted productivity across every sector. Margaret gave them matching daggers. Because marriage is a battlefield, and you should be armed. Lord Chen offered a toast that managed to be both sentimental and subtly threatening to anyone who might challenge the new order. But the moment Alara treasured most came late in the evening, when a group of young Omegas approached hesitantly. Your Majesty, their spokesperson said, a girl of perhaps 14 with hope shining in her eyes. We wanted to thank you. Because of you, my pack leader is letting me study medicine. My friend here is being trained as a scout. Another is learning metalwork. Things our mothers never dreamed possible. Don't thank me, Alara said gently. Thank yourselves for having the courage to try. I just opened a door. You're the ones walking through it. But you showed us the door existed, the girl insisted. Before you, we didn't know we could be anything except what tradition decided. Now we know different. Now we can dream bigger. After they left, Kael pulled Alara close. That's your real legacy, not the laws or reforms or political victories. It's the dreams you've made possible. Our legacy, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you believing in me first. We saved each other. He kissed her forehead. I was dying in that forest. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Becoming the king my father wanted instead of the leader this kingdom needed. You reminded me that strength isn't about dominance. It's about choosing compassion, even when cruelty would be easier. They danced together as the celebration continued around them. Two people who'd found each other in darkness and built something luminous from the wreckage of old assumptions. A year later, Alara stood in her office reviewing reports from across the kingdom. Omega literacy rates had increased by 40%. Applications to previously alpha-only professions had tripled. Incidents of domestic abuse had dropped sharply, not because abuse had ended, but because Omegas now had recourse and weren't afraid to use it. The changes weren't universal. Some packs still clung to old ways, some alphas still resented the new order. But the direction was clear, the momentum building. A knock interrupted her work. Margaret entered, looking amused. There's someone here to see you. Says she's from the Eastern Ridge pack. Alara's old pack. She hadn't heard from them since the confrontation over false charges. Who? She wouldn't give her name, just said you'd want to meet her. Curious, Alara agreed. The woman who entered was perhaps 50, weathered and tired-looking. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, just staring. You're really her, she finally said. Alara, my daughter. The world stopped. I don't have a mother, Alara said carefully. My parents recommended my expulsion, sided with the Alpha's son over me. I know, the woman's voice broke. It's the biggest regret of my life, but Alara, you don't understand. If we'd defended you, they would have expelled our entire family. Your father, your younger sister. We would have all been cast out, and I couldn't. So you sacrificed me to save yourselves. Yes. Tears streamed down the woman's face, and I've lived with that shame every day since. But I'm here now because I need you to know something. What you've done, what you've become, it's given me courage I didn't have before. I've left the Eastern Ridge pack. Left your father. I'm testifying about what really happened to you. About Damon's assault?
About the false charges, about all of it. Alara felt emotions warring inside her. Anger at the betrayal, gratitude for the belated courage, grief for the relationship they'd never had. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I watched you transform an entire kingdom while I couldn't even stand up to one alpha. Because you've shown that speaking truth is possible even when it's terrifying. Because I'm tired of being a coward." Her mother's hands twisted together. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that you were right to fight back, that I was wrong to fail you, and that I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to help other mothers be braver than I was." Alara stood silent for a long moment. Then she made a decision. "I can't give you forgiveness yet, maybe not ever. The wound is too deep." She saw her mother's face crumble, but continued. "But I can give you a chance to help. There's an Omega shelter being established in the capital, a safe place for those fleeing abuse. They need someone who understands what it's like to choose survival over courage, and why that choice haunts you. Someone who can help other Omegas find their strength before it's too late." Her mother's eyes widened. "You'd trust me with that?" "I'm trusting you to earn back your own self-respect. What you do with the opportunity is up to you." Alara gestured to the door. "Report to Margaret. She'll get you started." After her mother left, Alara stood at the window, watching the fortress courtyard below. Kael was there, sparring with soldiers, insisting that even kings needed to maintain their skills. He looked up, caught her watching, and grinned. She smiled back, feeling the weight of everything they'd built together. A year ago, she'd been a nobody, asking for warmth by a fire. Now she was a queen, an advisor, a revolutionary who'd reshaped a kingdom's understanding of power and worth. But more than any title, she was someone who'd survived the impossible and used that survival to help others do the same. The forest had taught her endurance. Kael had taught her love. And together they'd learned that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to accept that things have to stay as they've always been. That night, lying in the royal chambers with Kael's arms around her, Alara reflected on the journey from frozen forest to marble halls. "Do you ever miss it?" Kael asked softly. "The simplicity of being alone, just you and the wilderness." "Sometimes," she admitted. "It was peaceful in its own way. No politics, no expectations. You could go back? Visit the forest. I'd send guards." "No." She turned to face him. "The forest was survival. This is living, and I choose living. I choose the messiness and complications and endless challenges of trying to make the world better. I choose you. I choose us." His kiss was answer enough. Outside, the fortress settled into night. In the city below, thousands of people slept under laws that valued them equally. In packed territories across the kingdom, Omegas dreamed bigger dreams because one woman had refused to stay invisible. And in a cold northern forest, snow fell gently on the place where Alara had once built a desperate fire and made the choice that changed everything. She'd asked for warmth. She'd received a kingdom. But more than that, she'd received the chance to prove that courage and compassion could rewrite even the harshest world. That an Omega with nothing but will and skill could stand beside a king as an equal. That love, real love, wasn't about hierarchy or power, but about seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway. The fire she'd kindled in that frozen forest had grown into something unstoppable, a blaze that would burn away old cruelties and forge a new order from the ashes. And standing at its heart, no longer invisible but undeniably, powerfully present, was Alara Voss. The Omega who became a queen, the survivor who became a revolutionary. The woman who looked at a dying king and saw not a title, but a person worth saving, and in saving him, saved herself. In saving herself, saved a kingdom. From darkness into firelight. From silence into strength. From the frozen night where everything began to this warm moment where everything had transformed. She'd asked for warmth. She'd ignited a revolution. And she was done apologizing for the fire she'd become.